Hi everyone, my name is Victor Coronado, Senior Associate here at K Properties and Investments. Thank you everyone for joining us on the K Properties 1031 Exchange DST Investment Conference Call. We will begin with risks and disclosures. DST 1031 properties are only available to accredited investors, generally described as having a net worth of over $1 million exclusive of primary residence and accredited entities only. Those are generally described as an entity owned entirely by accredited individuals and or an entity with unsure if you're an accredited investor and or an accredited entity, please verify with your CPA and attorney. The information herein has been prepared for educational purposes only and does not constitute an offer to purchase securities, DST properties, and or real estate. Such offers are only made through a private placement memorandum, PPM, which is solely available to accredited investors and accredited entities. Securities are offered through FINEX, member FINRA, and SIPC. FINEX and K Properties are separate entities. This material is not to be interpreted as tax or legal advice. Please speak with your own tax and legal advisors for advice, guidance regarding your particular Delaware Statutory Trust properties, including, but not limited to, loss of entire investment principal, declining market values, tenant vacancies, and illiquidity. Investors should read the PPM carefully before investing, paying special attention to the risk section. Because investor situations and objectives vary, this information is not intended to indicate suitability for special attention to the risk section. Because investor situations and objectives vary, this information is not intended to indicate suitability for any particular investor. Please speak with your CPA and or attorney to determine if an investment in real estate DST properties is suitable for your particular situation or circumstance. Past performance is not indicative of future. Thank you everyone for listening in, and now I'd like to turn the call over to Alex Madden, our Senior Vice President here with K Properties and Investments.
Hey, thank you so much. And I want to thank everyone today for joining us on the call. We're going to have a great time going on DST Essentials of K Properties, and this is where we take an in-depth look at the many recurring themes and nuances of the DST investment process. In this series, we're going to be interviewing many members of the K Properties team who each bring their unique and valuable perspectives that they've formed over vast transactional experience in the DST investment landscape. Before we introduce our guests today, I'm going to start with a little bit about K Properties. K Properties is a national Delaware Statutory Trust investment firm. The www.kpi1031.com platform provides access to the marketplace of DSTs from over 25 different DST sponsor companies. This includes custom DSTs only available to K clients and an active DST secondary market listing from time to time. K Properties team members collectively have over 150 years of real estate experience and are licensed in all 50 states. And we've participated in over $30 billion in DST 1031 investments. I'm very excited to have our very own Orrin Barrow on the call today. Orrin Barrow is a Senior Vice President that works out of the K Properties headquarters in Los Angeles. Orrin is a leader and a specialist in the 1031 DST space and has helped investors purchase hundreds of millions of dollars in DST real estate. Orrin, thanks for being on the line today.
Yes, thank you for having me. Can you hear me properly?
I've got you there. And today we're going to be talking about asset class rejection. Specifically, we're going to be discussing which asset types K Properties avoid and some of the reasons behind that. So Orrin, thanks so much. And, would love to hear a little bit about, before we get into asset class rejection, could you just explain, what is an asset class? What kinds of asset classes do we typically find on the K Properties platform?
Yeah, absolutely. So asset classes refers to the type of property, right? Asset class is really real estate jargon, but essentially what it's defining is the type of property, right? Asset class in real estate can be distribution facilities for Pepsi, for FedEx, for UPS, for DHL. That would be considered an asset class. Multifamily would be considered an asset class. And there's different sort of sub-asset classes identified in multifamily versus Class A multifamily, which is identified in multifamily versus Class A multifamily, which is typically multifamily built from the 2020s on upward. Class B multifamily, which is a little bit older and probably had some renovations done before you see it on the platform. A value-add multifamily. Value-add multifamily is typically whereby there are renovations or significant lease-up to the actual property where there is some sort of risk involved, but the reward is great if we can properly do the value add strategy that we've intended to do. So there's different asset classes. Some asset classes have sub-asset classes, but ultimately when you hear the term asset classes, it's used to define the term asset classes. It's used to define the type of property that you're looking at. In terms of the asset classes that you'll typically find on the K Properties platform, you have all your major food groups, right? So you have retail, you have multi-tenant shopping, you have distribution, you have medical, you have office, you have multifamily and all the flavors of multifamily, value-add multifamily, manufactured housing communities, built-for-rent housing, and I didn't mention office. Office is typically the type of asset classes that we have. The type of assets, usually we add different types of assets. Right now we've actually added education. As a type of asset class. Typically this is just a building for a school. That's a new asset class that's been added to the marketplace. But ultimately, over the years, as different asset classes become more and more popular and more sort of amenable to the actual DST marketplace and its investors, we will add them to the platform. But I think it's actually easier to name the asset classes that we don't do. And I think those are the asset classes that we'll be getting into today. But just to sort of name them off, first you have hospitality. So that's, hotels, mini hotels, motels, those type of asset classes we tend to avoid. Senior, right? Senior care, memory care, and that sometimes is a surprise to investors. We do have an aging population in the United States, so those asset classes are becoming more and more popular with higher occupancy rates. But as we'll get into a little bit later, those asset classes have their own issues. It can be very risky for investors, especially in the Delaware Statutory Trusts, structure. We also don't do student housing. So student housing is an asset class that we've not done. We invited to our own actual marketplace a couple of years ago, and then after the pandemic, we saw that there's more risk attached to take it off our menu. Am I missing any of these asset classes that we don't do? I know senior care, memory care, hospitality, and student housing. Is there anything else, Alex, that I'm missing on that list that we've decided not to do?
Sure. No, I think that really hits it at a high level. The only one I would add on there is oil and gas. There oil and gas. There are some different oil and gas type of DSCs out there. It's a specific asset class. And Orrin, without without going into each one specifically, because we will do that in a moment. But why? What's wrong with these asset classes writ large that we would just wholesale write off a whole swath of investment real estate?
Yeah, of course. So the Delaware Statutory Trust is a very rigid structure. If anyone is having having issues going to sleep, or even if they just want to know more in depth, there's something called the 7 deadly sins that essentially make the asset class very rigid, which is why Revenue Ruling 2004-86 allows the Delaware Statutory Trust to be admissible for 1031 exchange proceeds. It's because of its rigidity that it qualifies for 1031 proceeds. In that rigidity, however, certain asset classes just don't fit the bill. Certain asset classes already have inherent risk built into them, like hospitality, like senior care, like memory care. And in order to properly manage those asset classes, you need the flexibility to be able to infuse cash, to be able to change course if necessary, to be able to withstand any sort of economic burdens that hit those asset classes. It's no mistake that during times of economic downturn, hospitality assets are one of the first ones to be hit, right? Because people stop traveling and therefore hospitality tends to suffer. That we feel as though are too great for our investors to take on, especially in a rigid asset class like the DSTs, where you're not able to move flexible, not able to be flexible enough to be able to handle the bumps and bruises that come along with managing those asset classes that have that inherent risk. So all the asset classes I named, and again, we'll go in detail, but they have inherent risk associated with them that make them very risky. And we've made a declaration, a promise, if you will, to our investors early on that we will not make them guinea pigs just to make a few extra bucks, right? So just because it's on a platform or those particular asset classes are paying a higher commission, it doesn't mean we're going to add it to our asset class and cross our fingers and hope the deal works out. We want to make sure we're putting the side of favorable investments on the side of our investors. And of course, there is no guarantee, but we've seen those asset classes suffer over the course of our time as a company, and we decided to take them off our platform.
Across, all of these, what they have in common is that they're historically very volatile, and the ways that you can hedge against volatility do not suit themselves well to the DST structure. So, I've and Orrin, I'm sure you're the same. You've spoken with different investors. I've spoken with some investors the same. You've spoken with different investors. I've spoken with some investors. Their families in oil and gas and has been for multiple generations, and they may be able to get comfortable with knowing the ins and outs of a specific oil and gas investment, and in a situation like that, maybe that investor has the ability to one versus the bad one, but there's a specific business plan that's inherent to something like oil and gas that is beyond just a typical real estate investment. There's other specific knowledge necessary, and there's other hedges that are typically going to be built into an investment like that, which kind of preclude them from conforming to the 7 deadly sins that you were just referencing there, Orrin. So let's kind of dive in here. Maybe we'll kind of just run through these different asset classes real quick, and you can just kind of tell us why these are rejected. What the specific things to look at, and then I would just encourage any listeners here, if you have greater questions about these, please reach out to your K Properties representative. We can speak about it in depth because some of them are a little bit counterintuitive. And I'll start off with probably the one that is probably the counterintuitive, because all the time I hear senior care, assisted living, baby boomers, they're all starting to retire. They're all, going to these 55 plus, communities and getting assisted living and this sort of a thing. And that's absolutely right. Nobody can argue with the demographics, of going on with the baby boomers. But Orrin, what are some of the, of going on with the baby boomers? But Orrin, what are some of the inherent risks to senior care that people are not often told about?
Yeah, of course. So just like you have a larger sort of uptick in terms of the aging of our population and that becoming more of a focal point, obviously maybe occupancy rates are rising over the countries in these particular facilities. So now that this is becoming more and more of a trend, more regulators are starting to actually be aware of the issue, and they start making sweeping and mandated changes into the operations of these businesses. For example, a couple of years ago, they changed the amount of nurses that can be per bed, per bed or per patient, right? And that could materially affect the operations of your business. Nursing is would consider one of the higher paying professions. If you now, as an operator of this particular facility, have to have there used to be one nurse per six patients. Now there's one nurse change. It has changed in the past. That can materially affect your operations for the foreseeable future, being that you have to have much more higher employment costs, much more higher administrative costs that will eat into your NOI, drop your actual income, and therefore make your particular investment that you thought would be profitable maybe be breaking even or even going down into the negative, right? And in the Delaware Statutory Trust, they are self-contained entities, right? So ultimately, they are not going to be pulling from any other resources or any other assets to be able to help stabilize this asset. And so after the reserves are taxed, right, reserves are money put aside to handle so severe that you have to tap your reserves in order to meet your actual expenses, you could end up having to sell the property for a loss, right? And so this has happened more often than not. We expect more sweeping regulations changes to come in the future, especially as our population continues to age and the occupancy rates of these particular properties tend to go up. So from that perspective, because there can be sweeping changes that formidably affect the overall income or the overall expenses of a property like senior care, memory care, assisted living, we tend to avoid those asset classes. Now, do some of those asset classes perform well? If you can be risk and be very prudent in the way that you are performing or expecting the type of income that you're expecting, it can be possible, but we don't want to put our investors in the possibility that the particular sponsor company did not properly sort of set aside funds or properly look at their actual projections to be able to look at their actual projections, to be able to take account for any sweeping regulations that come in the future, and then your actual investment get materially affected.
Yeah, that's spot on. That's spot on, Orrin. I mean, the regulatory risk, and you gave the example of the nurses there, and that's one that has certainly been historically present. Anything. I mean, it could be a situation from the local government, the state government, the federal government changes handicap accessibility, or, changes food handling requirements, or, medical administration, elevator safety. There's virtually an endless list, that any three levels of government here could regulate, and in that situation, from our perspective, it just seems like investors are not getting a risk adjusted return. I mean, typically you're seeing, maybe a 1% increase, maybe even less than that on some of these different investment potentials to get into what is substantially, what we consider to be a substantially higher investment, risk factor there. So, it's something to be considered. Just is the risk adjusted return, is the juice worth the squeeze on something like that. So speaking of, some of these other risks associated with hotels.
Yeah, so obviously hotels can be a very lucrative investment, specifically in great times, right? In great times, everyone's traveling, so you have a high occupancy rate. The higher the occupancy rate, specifically if you have a hotel in a very travel-friendly destination place, those particular occupancy rates go sky high. The higher occupancy rates go sky high. The higher the occupancy rate, the more you can move the rate per unit, right? The hotel rate. I'm sure everybody's seen this. If you're going to a particular destination during a hot time, if that particular destination is having a large-scale event, you will see the prices of the hotel skyrocket, and that only benefits the owner of those hotels. But a inflationary environment, an economic downturn, it can even be an overall economic downturn or a depression in that particular submarket. Maybe something happens to that submarket, a large employer moves out in that submarket, there's negative population growth in that submarket. Hospitality is one of the first asset classes to suffer. Right? At the end of the day, they do not have a long-term tenant. Usually their lease per customer is a day, a night, right? If it's not 2 days. So they do not have long-term customers, which means that they are one of the first type of asset classes to be affected by the overall economic environment. So, hotels or hospitality is what I would consider to be a front runner, right? When things are great, they're one of the better performing asset classes. When things are bad, they are one of the worst performing asset classes because of their short-term leases, the fact that they do not have long-term tenants involved, and that they have to actually move with the winds of the economy. As an investor, as an advisor to invest economic downturn, obviously there's only so much that you can do. If you have something like the Great Financial Crisis, most real estate will be affected. But the idea there is to sort of be able to protect investors' principal, be able to protect investors' investments. And at the end of the day, hospitality is much too volatile to do that. For investors who have large net worths who want to be exposed to hospitality, we totally understand that. However, the majority of our clients are ranging anywhere from $200,000 to $2 million in terms of their transaction size. Many of our investors are relying upon their income to maintain their livelihood, and so we just feel like the risk parameters are way too high.
I couldn't agree more, Orrin. So thank you so much for laying that out. Let's move on to student housing. Why student housing? It seems like that's another one like senior care that might be a little counterintuitive.
Yeah, I mean, student housing is great, right? I mean, for a while there, we felt as though because student housing has much more variables than your typical multifamily property. Early in K property sort of formation, we felt like there was not a sponsor company out there that we felt had enough necessarily built up experience in managing the actual student housing in the Delaware Statutory Trusts. You have to remember that student housing is cyclical, right? At the end of the day, it's not always full like a normal multifamily property would be. Students typically go home for the summertime. And so the idea there is that there's a specific lease-up period in student housing, I believe anywhere from May until June, they have to have the property 100% leased up. Now, one of the benefits of student housing is many times you have, instead of having the actual student on the hook, you have the parents on the hook, correct? And so the parents typically have much better balance sheets than the students. And so you have a much better tenant base. The problem is that if you don't get the property leased up properly during that lease-up period, you will face economic hardships for that entire school year. So the lease-up period is very, very vital. Making sure that you're upgrading the actual student housing, making sure the student housing is actually very, very attractive to the incoming student base or the returning student base, very, very attractive to the incoming student base or the returning student base is vital to the operations of student housing. Now, student housing obviously is different than multifamily because many times you would have what normally in a multifamily property, you would have one person to a 500 square foot unit. In student housing, you could have 3 people to a 500. In student housing, there's actually much more that you can squeeze per square foot out of a student housing property than you can out of a multifamily property, which is typically why when we had student housing properties, the cash flows are much higher. Obviously, enter the pandemic. No one was going to school. Everyone, if anyone was going, and not necessarily no one was going to school, but no one was staying in the student housing because of how close proximity they were to other students. It wouldn't have been deemed safe by local or state or federal government, and so many students decided to work to be able to do their actual schooling remote. Many student housing facilities have not recovered, right? And that's because the majority of the student housing that we have in the DST platform are not school-sponsored. They're school-sponsored student housing where it's very, very close to the campus, and typically the university will own them. And then on the outskirts of the actual university is where private label student housing is owned. And those student housing deals have yet to recover. Some have, many have not. And so we're seeing that as a potential shift in the culture of how we look at student housing. Are students going to be living on campus, or are they going to be getting apartments with their friends and their colleagues and staying off campus and not necessarily utilizing student housing properties? And so those particular deals we feel like are much too volatile, being that they have that very, very tight window in the leasing up period, being that many, many students are not staying in those particular type of asset classes anymore. If you can get a student housing property that's very close to the university having occupancies, then you've got yourself a great investment. However, we don't want to make the wrong bet that is not the particular case and that you're suffering with a particular investment that's supposed to have a particular cash flow requirement or cash flow distribution and is yet to meet it year after year because they're missing their projected numbers on that lease-up period. So that's why we're avoiding it, and I think we'll do so for the foreseeable future until the culture of academia and people staying in student housing changes.
That's exactly right, Orrin. I think you hit the nail on the head there, where the reality is that you've got a very narrow lease-up. In traditional multifamily, you can, if you lose a tenant in the middle of the winter or in the spring or summer or fall, it doesn't really matter. You can go and get another tenant in place. With student housing, it's in line with the cycle of education, the start of the school year. If you don't get fully leased up, prior to that school year, chances are you're probably not going to get fully out the rest of the year. And so there's obviously some inherent risk there. It's also a little bit more difficult to reposition a student housing asset. I don't know how many of our listeners have walked a student housing project recently, but they're usually going to be built to be basically indestructible. Cinder block, walls and that sort of a thing of housing. Not something that your typical family of 3 or 4 is going to want to go ahead and move into. So should they try to reposition an asset like that? It's not really the style that a lot of families or other people are looking for. Not that it's impossible to do, but it can kind of be an issue. If you're trying to redirect. And then lastly, supply. So supply is really the great killer of student housing here, where, if we've got the brand new, biggest, bestest, rooftop pool ever, and that's great for a few years. But what happens, if and when another beautiful new project is built across town or, down the street? Well, all of a sudden, where we were fetching, top of the line prices, now we're looking at potentially giving concessions just to get to the minimum occupancy requirements. Because students are looking, they finally made it to college and they're willing to, no expense spared for 4 years and looking at the new property. So there's a lot of volatility that we've seen there, and we just don't think it's really something that we would want to be recommending, particularly at this point in the market cycle. So, Orrin, I know we're going a little bit long here, but let's just kind of wrap up. What I think most people would consider a softball. Why oil and gas? Why would we not invest in oil and gas?
Yeah, oil and gas has been speculative for a long time. I mean, inherently it's speculative. At the end of the day, they're going to different wells, trying to hit oil. If it does, then it's very profitable. If it doesn't, then you're stuck with an empty well, and your investment could essentially go down to zero, right? Inherently, it's very, very risky. It follows the same exact sort of principles that we use for hospitality. When things are great, and oil is being found and being processed, that investment, and it can go for a long period of time. It is very, very profitable. But ultimately, if you are hitting an empty well or a dry well, or that particular land has already been tapped due to the fact that oil and reserves have moved or oil and reserves away, you could find yourself in a dud investment. So the idea here is that we are not trying to gamble with our investors' money. We're not trying to play necessarily games, essentially. We're trying to figure out which one is going to hit. The idea here is we're trying to put together portfolios that make the most sense, that have durable income streams, and that hedge against the economic pressures that we're probably going to be facing here in the next couple of years. That's what we're looking to do. That's why we always preach the debt-free approach, which is why we're very conservative when we're adding debt to investors' portfolio. We give them warnings about the pros and cons of each of the asset classes that they're getting into. A part of that is and the part of avoiding asset classes like oil and gas, like hospitality, like senior care and memory care, and like student housing that sort of have a very much volatile activity, very volatile characteristic to them, and that's what we sort of stand on and build the business on.
Absolutely, Orrin. Well, thank you so much and really just phenomenal information there, Orrin. Thanks for being on with us.
Yeah, thank you guys for having me. Again, please, if you have any questions regarding the asset classes that you may be invested in or that are on the DST platform, please give your local representative from K Properties a call, or visit our platform, which is www.kpi1031.com. Thank you for having me out.
Absolutely, Orrin. That's great. And on that platform, you'll see that we have between 20 and 40 different DST offerings from over 25 DST sponsors. Please visit the website or call K Properties at 855-899 for the licensed K registered representative who can walk you through your options. Orrin, thanks again, and please join us next time for the DST Essentials with K Properties, an in-depth look at the various aspects of DST 1031 exchange and investment process.